He could have ended it there, beneath the heat of Mustafa's sky, with fire in his eyes and betrayal still echoing between every breath. He could have stopped the darkness from ever rising again, but instead he turned away, not from fear, not from weakness, but from love that refused to let go. Mercy was the wound he couldn't close. It bled into the stars, into the years, into the lives lost under Vader's shadow. He saw the monster, he saw the fall, he saw the fire burn, everything they built, and still he spared him. Still he whispered goodbye to a man who no longer existed. Obi-Wan walked into exile, carrying more than guilt. He carried the echo of screams, the weight of children never saved, the ruin of a galaxy that once had hope. He wandered not to hide, but to break in silence, to crumble away from a world he believed he had failed. He saw Luke not as redemption, but as a chance to break the cycle, to plant something where everything had turned to ash. But even then, he never spoke of what he'd done, never admitted that sparing one life cost millions, because to say it aloud would shatter what little remained of him. There is no peace in a mercy that breeds suffering. There is no glory in letting evil rise from the ashes. And yet he made that choice, a choice carved in agony, wrapped in love, tangled in the hope that someday, somehow, that boy would return from the fire. In this video, we're going to uncover the truth behind Obi-Wan's most devastating decision. We'll explore how his mercy gave rise to a tyrant, how sparing Anakin allowed Darth Vader to be born, and how a single act of love became the galaxy's most haunting mistake. He had the high ground, he had the strength, he had the clarity to see what Anakin had become, and yet he walked away, not because he was weak, but because he believed mercy still mattered, and that belief would haunt the galaxy forever. Obi-Wan Kenobi was trained to value restraint, to honor the Jedi code even in war, but codes are only useful if they protect lives, not if they blind you to the truth. And in that moment, on Mustafar, the truth was burning right in front of him. Anakin Skywalker had fallen, not by accident, not by deception, but by choice. He chose power over peace, fear over faith, control over compassion. And Obi-Wan knew this. He saw it in his eyes. He heard it in his screams. Still he hesitated. Still he showed him kindness. Still he left him to fate instead of finishing what had already been decided. And in doing so, he allowed the dark side to rise without opposition, without consequence, without closure. And maybe he thought the fire would be enough. Maybe he believed no one could survive that kind of pain. But the galaxy does not run on hope. It runs on actions. And Obi-Wan's inaction became the seed of every atrocity that followed. He saw the Jedi Temple in flames. He saw the younglings. He saw Padme collapse beneath the weight of betrayal. And still, he could not bring himself to end it. To bring true justice to the one who shattered everything they fought for. This was not a duel of brothers. This was not a final test of skill. This was an execution cloaked in hesitation. A reckoning avoided at the last breath. And the cost of that mercy was paid in screams across the stars. Vader did not die on Mustafar. He was born there, forged in fire and left unchecked. Allowed to rise again because Obi-Wan looked away. Because Obi-Wan still saw the boy, not the monster. That refusal to accept the truth. That clinging to what once was, it cost the rebellion countless lives. It empowered an empire that ruled through terror. It gave Palpatine the ultimate weapon. A fallen Jedi with no chains. You cannot call it mercy if it feeds the fire. You cannot call it noble if it leads to ruin. And Obi-Wan, for all his wisdom, for all his pain, made the one choice he could never take back. There is no peace in his silence, no comfort in his exile. Only the quiet agony of a man who failed not by losing, but by letting go too late, by loving someone too much to stop them when it mattered most. And that kind of grief does not fade with time. He watched the empire rise, and knew his part in its creation. He watched innocence fall, and knew his chance to prevent it slip through his fingers. And he lived with that, not as punishment, but as penance. And every breath he took carried the weight of what he left undone. Every whisper of Vader's name was a wound reopened. Every story of destruction, every planet lost, reminded him that his greatest failure wore the face of someone he once called brother, and no scar ever stung as much as that memory. He told Luke the truth in fragments, never the full weight of it. Never the moment he looked down at Anakin and chose to let him breathe. Maybe because he couldn't bear to admit it. Maybe because it broke him just to remember. And deep down he knew that truth would shatter everything if spoken aloud. And in that desert, in the shadows, Obi-Wan didn't just hide from the Empire. He hid from himself. From the man who believed mercy was always the answer, even when it birthed a monster. And that silence became its own kind of prison. Still, there was something almost holy about that moment. Two titans clashing over lava. The fate of the galaxy hanging on each breath, each strike. And when Obi-Wan won, it felt like the Force itself had spoken. The stars themselves seemed to pause in reverence. He was everything the Jedi hoped for: composed, powerful, precise. And when the battle was over, he chose not vengeance, not rage, but restraint. And in that choice, he became the embodiment of the Jedi Code, a symbol carved from fire and discipline. It was not cowardice, it was conviction. The kind that refuses to kill, even when every reason says otherwise. The kind that still sees light in the dark, and refuses to snuff it out completely. Because somewhere inside him, he still believed redemption was possible. There is beauty in that, even if it led to ruin. There is a purity in choosing compassion, in choosing not to be the executioner, even when justice screams for it. Because a heart that chooses empathy cannot easily become a tyrant. Because in that moment, Obi-Wan wasn't just a warrior, he was a believer, and belief, especially in the face of devastation, is its own kind of strength. And sometimes strength means knowing when not to strike. What if his choice was never about the past, but the future? What if Obi-Wan saw that one day someone else would face Vader, and that person might save him, not destroy him? And that tiny sliver of possibility was worth protecting. Maybe he believed Padma's final words, that there was still good in him. Maybe he held on to that one thread, that one fragile idea, that Anakin was not gone forever, just lost. And sometimes the lost find their way back in the dark. And he knew the galaxy would bleed. But maybe, just maybe, there would come a moment when the darkness would falter, when the son would meet the father, and something greater would be born from it. Something that could never be born from vengeance. It's a dangerous kind of hope, the kind that demands sacrifice, the kind that costs everything and promises nothing. But it's the only kind Obi-Wan ever believed in, the kind rooted not in certainty, but in faith. He couldn't save Anakin, but maybe he saved the chance for Anakin to save himself, not through battle, but through love, through family, through legacy. And that legacy would carry the light he could no longer bear to hold. Obi-Wan's greatest sin was not rage, not revenge, but mercy. A mercy that echoed across generations in the shape of ruin. A choice that spared a life, but doomed a galaxy. And sins born from love cut the deepest. He did what he thought was right, and that is the tragedy. Because right is not always good, and good is not always kind. And kindness without consequence can still destroy everything, even with the purest intent. The man who once called him brother became the enforcer of tyranny, the hand that crushed rebellion, the shadow that haunted every child who dared to dream. And that shadow was allowed to exist, because a single blade was not swung. But this is not a story of villains and saints. It's a story of men, of choices, of broken hearts, trying to do the right thing in a world that doesn't reward it. And Obi-Wan, for all his strength, for all his sorrow, made the one choice he hoped would save a soul, and lost the galaxy instead. And that loss became the foundation of a new war. And maybe that's the real legacy. Not of a Jedi, not of a master, but of a man who loved too deeply to kill, and paid the price for believing love alone could stop the fall. And in that belief, we see both the tragedy and the truth of what it means to care.